Ja, schönen guten Morgen, good morning. It's my special pleasure to welcome you to today's masterclass with our special guest Mani Haghigi. Masterclass means in this case that we will have a longer and more intense and maybe more extensive or excessive interview and talk about the philosophy, the style, the motives of Haghigi's films, and maybe also give them a broader context. That means watch them through both a global lens and a local lens and connect those poles. It's not only me, but also my colleague Haghigi, who will support the masterclass with his questions. And I have to say that we are carrying out an ongoing project on Iranian cinema together with Professor Ute Holl, who unfortunately isn't here today. And we are carrying out a project on the after images of revolution and war in the Iranian cinema after 1979. But at the moment we realize that there are also a lot of important movies before 1979, as of course Mani Haghigi knows better than us. I hope the most of you have seen the screenings of Man at Work, Modest Reception, Abadan and Dragon Arrives so far, that we also can go in depth, especially in the second part of the masterclass, that we can blow up some details together with Mani Haghigi. And I suggest that especially in the second part of the masterclass, you will have the chance to enter the discussion with your questions. But in case you have a very important question and you want to ask them, please ask them. Feel free to ask them. Let me reintroduce Mani Haghigi to you. So I really prepared a little introduction that maybe that also tries to give our guests a broader context, and then I will pose my first question. With Mr. Haghigi, with Mani Haghigi, we have not only a filmmaker, a screenwriter, and an actor, but also a filmmaker with a philosophical background, as you might already know. On Wednesday, he referred to Heidegger and Heidegger's Angst after Man at Work. And I found a little note in the internet, not by Mani Haghigi, but by a student in Montreal. Maybe you know this note, and I will read it to you. It's very short and harmless. The student writes, I bought a copy of Jacques Derrida's Limited Inc. at Macondo Books yesterday, and it was inscribed Mani Haghigi, 21st October 1997, Montreal. I googled the name, as I always do when I find a reasonable, informative inscription, because I love the story of a book as much as I love the story in a book. So, of course, we can relate it to A Dragon Arrives and all the traces. Usually, I continue with the quote. Usually, I discover nothing very interesting from these searches, a Facebook page perhaps, or a business profile, but most often nothing that would even positively identify the former owner of my book. My search for Mani Haghigi, however, was rather more informative. Apparently, Haghigi is a well-known Iranian filmmaker, the director of Abadan, Man at Work, Hamoon, Basel, and Canaan, and the writer of Fireworks Wednesday. His Man at Work in particular is considered to be a modern classic of Iranian cinema. Quote end. Mani Haghigi studied philosophy and cultural studies in Montreal, I think, for 12 years.
That's right.
The first feature film he made, as you already know, was Abadan. It was an underground movie. He did it after he returned from Canada to Iran. That means underground film means that the film did receive a shooting and a screening permission. So as Mani Haghigi has already told you, after Abadan, they told me that was told me in a talk we had. You had to use a fake permission from another shooting. As you know, there are a lot of bureaucratic hoops you have to circumvent and jump through, and a lot of loopholes you have to find in order to get a screening permission in Iran. That is a long story, a very complex story. We are concerned and occupied with the relation of censorship and aesthetics for quite a long time now. Just to explain you, maybe you know it, in case you don't, I think it's important to give you some informations. After 1979, that means after the Islamic Revolution, and after 1979 means also during the Iran-Iraq War, which in fact was 8 years long. You know, we are talking about the longest war of the 20th century from 1918 to 1988. In those times, after the revolution, during the war, the film industry had not been shut down, but had been reshaped, I would say, in accordance with Islamic values and the sacred defense doctrine of the war. It's especially the Ministry of Culture and Islamic Guidance with its, I would say, authoritative wing, the Farabi Cinema Foundation, that tries to use film as a kind of propaganda instrument. There are a lot of other institutions that is really complex, and I won't have the time, of course, to introduce it now. And film promotion, I would say, and censorship is very complex, intertwined, not only in Iran, but in Iran in a special way. But at the same time, there is no rule that hasn't been broken, I would say, injured, of course, especially by Mani Haghigi. And I don't think that there is something, you will tell me maybe, that there's something like a really written censorship code. We can talk about it later on. When we talk about censorship, we should talk about periods, maybe also some people you can talk with. You already told us, you know, it's not a machine, it's not a Kafkaesque labyrinth. There are some people you can talk with. It's a question of relations, of connections, of contradictions, of everything. It's quite interesting that you made a lot of films during a very dark era, during the era Ahmadinejad, from 2005 to 2013. You made 3 movies. And to finish my introduction and to come to my first question, quite general question, Mani Haghigi has also co-written films. He has co-written Ashghar Farhadi's Fireworks Wednesdays, which will be screened tomorrow, I think. In the other way round, Ashghar Farhadi has co-written your film Kanaan. And you, as you already know, you played in quite a lot of movies by Farhadi, like About Ali, and of course in your own movies like Modest Reception and Yesterday You Know It in A Dragon Arrives. When people think of Iranian cinema, they have certain images, moods, issues in mind, you know. Just to give you some spotlights, they think of minimalist aesthetic, reduced forms, you know. Just to give you a little list of moods they have in mind. They think of characters under pressures. They think of simple events, of a simple or maybe fresh or pure way of storytelling. They think of restrictions and censorship, of course. for some people, Iranian cinema, Iranian style means realism, which is quite strange because there are a lot of filmmakers who say you can't make a realist movie under conditions of censorship. But the question is, what is realism? And realism, of course, is also a question of form. Other people think of connect Iranian cinema to children movies, to road movies, to oppressed filmmakers in opposition, to opportunist filmmakers whitewashing the government. There are certain Orient images, ethno-cliches circling around. Some films, of course, have spread very consciously, referring to village life, etc. They use exotism, esoteric, sometimes at cost of politic content. And especially after the Green Movement, people, of course, wanted to see more political films. So I would say there is also a certain typecasting of international film festivals, international film politics. That means that film festivals like to label filmmakers and to tag them. To give you an example, Kiarostami, the philosopher, the cosmopolite, Panahi, the opportunist, the dissident filmmaker, etc. So those are, I really would say, it's festival typecasting. And now we have Mani Haghigi here. We've seen his movies, and I think he found and constructed, of course, quite a new slot and refreshed, reshaped the Iranian cinema, especially also as it is presented on festivals in a certain way. I have one quote by you. You once told in an interview, quote, Mani Haghigi, "It certainly doesn't belong to Iranian cinema as it is usually presented at film festivals." Your movie, well, Iranian cinema is a lot more diverse than that, than presented as festivals. So this phrase by you gave me a little bit the impression you also want to give the world new images, maybe also new images of the Iranian cinema and the diversity of Iranian cinema. My first question, and it's a very general question, and there are some small questions related to it. In what sense did your international reputation change also the position you have on a local level, on a I don't want to say national level, just the position in Iran and regarding the local audience in Tehran or somewhere else? Do they regard you as somebody, I would say, who lost the relation to his own culture? That's a big issue, and lost the relation to people's interest, because that's also something, a lot of people outside think the Iranian culture is a very resistant culture, a culture very resistant to influences. It's an image circling around, and that's what a lot of people, I'm speaking of European people, like sometimes about Iranian cinema, that it's so resistant against Hollywood, resistant against influences, and they want to see something pure, something new. Of course, it's a sort of exotism and Orientalism. And my question is, could you a little bit talk about your position in the cross-cultural space between local and global? And I'm not meaning, in the sense of, are you thinking of international audience or national audience? Just to talk about the tension in between this cross-cultural space. What are your ways of dealing with those dynamics between national and international festivals?
Hello, thanks for coming. Let me put it this way. I don't... This dynamic that you're talking about, this tension that you're talking about between a national cinema and an international idea of that national cinema exists in two ways. this might turn into a boring conversation, so I'm going to make it very kind of quick. Outside Iran, as you said correctly, there's this need to look at Iranian cinema as a savior, in the sense that it's resisting certain values that European art house film audiences want to rediscover. So they look to Iranian cinema as the other of Hollywood, as the other of commercial filmmaking, as some authentic and pure place where you can find new ideas relating to art, which I find complicated and problematic in one sense. But this tension also exists within Iran in a different sense, in that Iranian audiences, and specifically Iranian critics, make this dichotomy between filmmakers who are choosing an international audience for their films versus, as opposed to filmmakers who are making films for their own people, so to speak. I've been very unsatisfied with both of these dichotomies. I've been very unsatisfied with. I'm basically just very unsatisfied whenever people want to label me as one thing or the other.
Yeah.
I mean, my whole point has always been, and not just as a filmmaker, I think as a person, it's been very important to me to resist this kind of hole that people want to put you in. Because once you let yourself be put in that position, I find that it's very difficult to remove yourself from it. Labels don't really get unstuck from artists. So, for example, I think that both myself and some of the friends that I've been working with, specifically Asghar Farhadi, who you mentioned, we've always been talking about how important it is for us to make films that address both an international audience and our local audience at the same time. And we've always tried to find issues to discuss which would excite both you and Iranians at the same time. And I think we've succeeded to some degree. So, for example, films like A Separation, about Ellie, Fireworks Wednesday, which you'll see, I think, tomorrow.
Yep.
A Dragon Arrives, which is actually in wide release in Tehran right now as we speak. These are films that did quite well outside Iran in the festival circuit. They've been released in Europe, they've been released in the United States, and they've done quite well with Iranian audiences at the same time. Before these films were made, there was a pretty specific distinction between films that were made. In Iran, they call them festival films, right? So Kiarostami, Jafar Panahi, Bahman Qobadi, all these people were these were filmmakers who were considered, in a sense, they were considered like traitors, because the critics and the government especially tried to portray them as people who are turning their backs to their own people and making films for foreigners, right? And on the other side of the line, we had directors who resisted this. I mean, they called it prostitution, basically. They resisted becoming prostitutes to the foreign, audiences, and remained true Iranian filmmakers. And so those are the people you don't hear about because they've never screened their films outside Iran. This I found quite ridiculous. I think that in an age where you have access to the internet, you have online distribution of film, you have. I mean, it's a globalized world. It doesn't really mean that much sense. It doesn't make that much sense to make this distinction anymore. And I think a very good case in point for me is A Dragon Arrives, which you saw last night, because it can address both Iranians and non-Iranians on very different levels. Mm-hmm. It's true that Iranians would see that film and see an entirely different film, right, than people saw here last night. But that doesn't matter, because it really talks in two different registers. It's as if two films are superimposed on each other, and one satisfies one group of people and the other one satisfies another. And that's that's been the project anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. I also think that both of you, Asghar Farhadi and you find. Let me pinpoint it a little bit. You have find some formulas to avoid those distinction, and of course different formulas, different tactics. In what sense or in what way did your international reputation change your, let's say, it's relative, let's say, independence or independent working conditions in Iran?
I started filmmaking, as you mentioned, as what people call an underground filmmaker, in the sense that I realized before I even made my first film, I was looking at the conditions under which films were made in Iran. And the main thing that I realized was that how the bureaucratic process of issuing permits for films defined those films. Right. And I thought, if I want to make a new kind of film, I just have to avoid this bureaucratic channel, which is kind of a strange thing to do, because you can't really make, I mean, technically you couldn't make films outside those channels at all. What happened was that this discovery of mine coincided with the digital revolution in filmmaking technology. And so in the year, I don't know, when was this, like 2000, around 2000, between 2000 and 2005, it became quite easy to make films with very cheap digital cameras.
Like Abadan.
Yeah, and so it occurred to me that because there's this problem of, I mean, if you work outside these bureaucratic channels in Iran, you can't screen your film, which means that you can't recoup your money, right? But if you're not spending any money, this is a Marxist notion. If you own the means of production, then you're free, right? And so it occurred to me that I could make a film without spending any money, and therefore I could make these films outside the network of bureaucratic permits. And it was just a free object, I sort of managed to. This is a huge thing. We managed to exclude capital from the network of filmmaking. Yeah. So we made Abadan with our personal money. Our friends came together and we gathered some money and we made the film for $50,000, which is nothing. And then we made Men at Work for $10,000, which is even less. It's nothing, really. I mean, even today, I can't imagine how I did that. Like, when I look back, I wonder, how the hell did I manage to make these? It's free. Like, it's you made the film for free, basically. On Men at Work, the only money we spent was on food for the actors and for transportation. That's it. Everything else was free. And so once we figured this out, that this could be done, suddenly there was this whole new way of making films, which completely bewildered the authorities, because within the course of 5 years, there were like all these young people making a huge number of very interesting, avant-garde, unusual feature films. And then just putting them in there. And the other thing is, with a digital film, you just put it in your pocket and leave the country. You don't have these huge reels of celluloid that you have to carry around. So that's what I did. I just put my film in my pocket and went to the airport and screened Abadan at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York. It was, the easiest thing in the world. And that started this whole new thing of, now we had, and this is what the whole point of this huge speech I just made is this, that it gave us a new bargaining position with the government. We said, look, we don't need to do, we can make our films and you can't do anything about it. You can't stop us from producing it. You can't stop us from distributing it. So let's talk about your rules of censorship again.
Are there written rules? Or?
No, there aren't. No, there aren't. But there were these conditions. It was beforehand it was like a slavery situation. Like they just could stop you from showing your films, and that would kill you basically. Now we had the power to make and distribute our films completely regardless of what they thought. And so we went back, because of course you can't go on making these cheap films, right? If you want to make serious films, if you want to develop as a filmmaker, you eventually have to have access to capital again. But this sort of made us be able to do that with some power.
As you know, I've been in Tehran some weeks ago, and also at the festival, and talked to a lot of people, and I have a little bit the impression, people don't want to talk about the fall of sanctions or something like that. They want to talk about post-Ahmadinejad. Also they live in the post-Ahmadinejad area, and a lot of shocks relaxing a little bit now after this area. Of course, it's also a psychological time figure, the so-called Nachträglichkeit, the delayed working through of something that has happened. Did the fact that you are now making films in the, let's say, post-Ahmadinejad area changed something?
No,
for you?
Not for me.
Working conditions?
No, I mean, I have to speak for myself. In my case, nothing has really changed that much, because the things I want are much larger than the tiny little incremental differences between Ahmadinejad's period and this period. Yes, things have changed, and you're a little bit more free, and you're a little bit more, able to do new things. But that little bit isn't at all what I'm after. So it doesn't make, it's like you're starving and you have nothing to eat, and somebody gives you a piece of cake this big. It makes no difference, really. You can't. You're going to die of starvation. There's, in fact, this may sound a little strange, but I'm a little less happy than my colleagues, because I find that during the Ahmadinejad regime, it was a more clear form of suppression. So you knew who was suppressing you. Mm-hmm. And it was a Stalinist kind of discourse. You walked into an office and there was a guy sitting there and saying, I'm not going to let you do this. You would negotiate with him, either you would win or not, right? Mm-hmm. Today, it's more of a Foucault deal going. It's like, who is exactly suppressing me? I would go into the same office, same guy, not the same person, but the same guy in the same position is sitting in front of me. He's very nice. He's smiling at me and he's telling me I can do whatever I want. And of course, you're totally free to do this. And it's the new era, go and make your film and feel free. However, there are some people who called us this morning, and we're a little concerned. Maybe you should be thinking more seriously about blah, blah, blah. And you're like, wait a minute, who is concerned? We don't know. There's this atmosphere of repression with no one that you can point to and say, okay, you're responsible you're the guy, right? I'm going to talk to you. And so my main tool of resisting censorship, which is negotiation, has been taken away from me. Mm-hmm. Usually I can sit across from someone and talk to them. Mm-hmm. And I'm very good at that. I can talk to people for hours. Mm-hmm. I don't get tired.
You're lucky.
I stand there. If I have to come back tomorrow, I go back tomorrow. If it takes a week, I'll go. And in the end, I'll rescue my film. Yeah. If I have the opportunity to talk to somebody, which is what happened with Modest Reception. I told the story during the Q&A. Now, there's nobody to talk to. You don't know who's doing this to you anymore. So it looks on the surface like it's a little more free, but I find it a little more suppressive.
Yes, who is oppressing you? What do you do against self-censorship?
Yeah, well,
you have a masterclass you can give.
Yeah, it ends up being like that. You have to. The question of self-censorship is an interesting one, because avoiding that is the most difficult step, right? And especially out in the West, I find that there's always this, people are always already accusing you of self-censorship, right? You walk into a room and people think, you've self-censored yourself, haven't you? I'm like, yeah, maybe. Right? It feels like you're already guilty of something.
They want you to blame just for making movies.
Yeah, there is this weird Catholic original sin thing going on. I was like,
know it very
if you're
well.
an Iranian filmmaker, you have already committed the sin of self-censorship. So I find that ridiculous.
I'd like to ask you one more, let's say, meta question about censorship, and then we can go more in details. Of course, in details also of your movies. Censorship is a big issue when it comes to Iranian cinema. Everybody's talking about it. Of course, everybody wants to hear stories.
Yeah.
How did you do it, and etc. It's such a big issue that sometimes I'm tempted to worry, or maybe others are tempted to worry about the importance of Iranian cinema without those stories and without censorship. And I even met a filmmaker last year who told me, I can't stand it anymore to talk about my films and at the same time about censorship. Can you elaborate on it a little bit?
No.
Not on censorship, but on the...
Look, we're artists, and we are treated as if we are victims of censorship. It's two different things altogether. We are treated as... And I do have a very offensive account of why this is the case, because I do think, and I'm sorry if this offends anybody here, but I do think that Western festival organizers and Western sort of film buffs enjoy. There's this weird, strange sense that people enjoy hearing about the suffering, and they especially enjoy that. This is the case with, for example, Jafar Panahi and all the stuff that surrounds him, like. The guy has been arrested. He was in jail for a long time. He was in solitary confinement for a film he made. Of course, the film was banned, and his other films were censored. And so the Berlin Festival invites him to be a jury member, knowing that he cannot even leave the country. And so he cannot leave the country. And so there's this empty chair with Jafar Panahi's name on it. And there's these photographs taken of that chair, and they're printed in the newspapers. And there's this huge spectacle of, look, we're so wonderfully liberal, and we're supporting Jafar Panahi, who is in jail. And there's this, I find, on the one hand, of course, he should be supported. Of course, we should be resisting this state of affairs. But the perverse element of enjoyment that is attached to this whole thing, as if we feel so good about ourselves that we're sort of helping you poor Iranian suppressed filmmakers, kind of over time becomes a little strange, right? Well, it becomes like, right. Why are you so happy about helping us, or something like this? So there is what I've come to describe as a neo-imperialism, and then this relates to both people's attitudes towards censorship and people's attitude towards helping us. In that there is a sense of, the big liberating father kind of coming in and sort of helping the filmmakers. The other thing is, and this is another point of issue, because I've always been criticized very harshly about this particular view that I have regarding censorship. I, unlike most of my colleagues, believe that, given the a priori fact that I live in a country that suppresses artistic freedom, I believe in negotiating with the censorship board. There are lots and lots of my colleagues who say, I will never talk to you. Talking to you will legitimize your position, and I will not do this. and I will never cut a single frame out of my film because you want me to. Right? I respect that position. That is not my position. I think that I consider my films to be like my children. I don't have children, so I think of my films as my children. And I think, look, if the authorities arrested my kid, right, and they took my little daughter to jail and said, "Come and talk to us, and we'll release her," right? I would go and talk to them, and if it requires some kind of a bargain to get her out, I would make that bargain. Yes, it's not the ideal state of things, and I realize that there's some kind of a moral shortcoming involved in this. I understand that fully, but in the end, my film is screened, and maybe there's and I negotiate in a very rough and tough way about not having anything cut out, and I told that story also here, where with Modest Reception, for example, we had this list of things that we had to cut out of the film. It amounted to 25 minutes.
25 minutes, okay.
And I went into this really long and crazy discussion with the censorship board and reduced it to 6 seconds. I think that's worthwhile, right? I personally find that to be worthwhile. Those 6 seconds are okay with me. They can leave the film. At least I have a film, and I can bring it to you, and I can show it to you. So many other people, and this has become some kind of a moral thing, refuse to take those 6 seconds out, and so there's no film. And there's no film, but there's this sense of I'm a hero. I've resisted power. But who cares about? I don't care about that. Yeah. I think that's I personally. This is not something I'm imposing on others, but I think it's more interesting to have a film.
Yeah, yeah. Also, Europeans like to have martyrs and heroes.
Precisely.
It's not
I mentioned the original sin. I didn't want to get into the martyr bit, but yeah.
Before we get a little bit closer, of course, to your movies, to your philosophy, to your motives, we should talk about visual motives and everything like that. I'd like to invite you and also Hemin and you, the audience, maybe to ask some more questions related to those issues we had so far. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of contradiction. You said nowadays the censor is not visible anymore. Then how can you go into bargaining with somebody who is not there? Or is the person you are talking to obliged to bargain with you? Which seconds have to be cut out?
Yeah, well, the challenge now, you're right. There is a contradiction, but there's a solution to that contradiction also. I think the challenge previously was to convince the person across the table to change his mind. And I say his mind because it's always a man. Now the challenge is different. The challenge now is to find him, right? And to find him and make him admit that he's the one who's making this demand. Because as soon as he does admit that he's the one who has the power to stop you, then you're back in that original position of negotiating with him, right? Which is much easier to do than it might seem. It's not the Gestapo or anything like that. It's some guy, he's a bureaucrat, and he's afraid of you because you're an internationally renowned filmmaker. You're going to make interviews. You're going to talk about this at meetings like this, and I have a lot of power over them. It's not like I'm the little guy being suppressed by this big machinery of state. No, it's this guy who's totally terrified of what I'm going to do to him. And he's the one who wants to make the negotiation happen, right? He's the one who wants me to kind of come to an agreement with him. Usually, in my case, that's been the case all along. And so, yeah, finding him. Like, who is going to admit that he's the one stopping me from doing what I'm doing? That's become the challenge. But, you find them. It doesn't take very long. It's just... it's boring because it takes a long time and you have to do a lot of work, boring work, to find the person. But once you do, then it's back to square one. You're negotiating.
Can I just
Yeah.
add another question? With the censorship, usually it's also a creative force. There are some hypotheses about that especially when you are in a censored system, you have to find ways to get along with it. And how far do you see in your work?
Yeah. See, this is a double-edged sword when we talk about the benefits of censorship. Yes, in my case, it's always been the case that when I have failed in the negotiation, I have really been forced to pull something out of my film, I've had to come and think a lot more deeply about, okay, so how am I going to say this now? They don't let me say it the simple way. Now I have to say it in some more complicated way. And usually you come up with something fascinating and interesting. And yes, in my case, again, it's usually been the case that, this is very strange to say it, but usually it's been the case that something more interesting has come out. Okay? But let me just risking saying that censorship really helps the creative process. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that obstructions of all kind usually help the creative process, right? Any kind of obstruction, for example, structure, like a structure in a screenplay is something that you create in order to make obstructions for yourself so you can actually create something beautiful, right? Or you go on the film set, you're planning on a sunny day, and now there's thick clouds everywhere. Challenge, you're going to have to come up with some interesting way of dealing with the fact that it's going to be cloudy for the next 3 days. You have to shoot your scene. You were thinking it was going to be a sunny scene, and now come up with some way of explaining this. So in this respect, right, it's a subsection of obstructions in general that censorship can also be helpful in this way. But still, it's morally a different entity altogether than, say, the West. You know this fantastic Lars von Trier film, 5 Obstructions, about
That's
how...
great,
that explains everything, right? So, like, you've seen it, right? Like, you create these artificial barriers around the filmmaker, and that forces him to come up with creative ways of dealing with his problem. In that sense, sadly, censorship really helps.
Yeah, but, just to add something, isn't it always afterwards, after the shooting, looking back, that you can say, censorship helped me, It's a creative force. Isn't it a real pain in the ass during shooting?
Look, let me just be very clear. All these things I'm saying are going to make you hate me more and more.
It's just an opinion.
But the relationship between an artist and the censorship agent, the guy, is very much like a Stockholm Syndrome relationship for me, right? So my thing is, I'm so fascinated by what he's gonna say, and I wonder if he's gonna like my film, and is he gonna? And he has the same thing with me. Like these meetings are a lot more interesting than you might imagine, because we walk in and it's kind of like a love affair. Like, he wants me to love him, and I want him to love me. And so the discussion is really, really friendly and full of interesting points, and it's like deal making. It's like it's as if there's, we have to leave the room with some kind of a good deal that will make us both happy, and we're trying to help each other, get there. And so maybe morally it's ridiculous, but in terms of a human relationship, it is actually a more fascinating and interesting thing than I've ever had with lovers, for example.
Another question.
Well, that we're talking so much about censorship, and if we think of Iran now, we also think a lot then with movies, yes, now, but also about the relation with the world, yes, and sure there's censorship in Iran, but actually, I don't know, how is the censorship for Iran and let's say their allies in the region?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know so much about other movies from other countries. Can they make freely movies, or is it in Iran better, or is it?
I have no idea. I've never worked in neighboring countries in the region. I'm sure, like, if I was a Turkish filmmaker, if I was a Russian filmmaker, and these are all very different dynamics. I'm trying to describe to you what the dynamic in Iran is. And not even in Iran, I'm trying to describe what my personal experience of censorship in Iran is, because I do know that other filmmakers with a different sensibility than mine have had a very different experience, right? Most of my colleagues wouldn't come here and talk about the Stockholm syndrome when they're talking about censorship in Iran. But you know, I'm an easygoing guy. I like to make friends with everybody, and including you know, barbaric people, and so I'm always trying to find the sort of the positive aspect of any relationship and focusing on that and get that to help me. So even what I'm describing here is strictly my own personal experience. You talk to Jafar Panahi, and he will, you know, having come out of a, you know, solitary prisons experience, and he won't be saying the same things, right? All right.
Yeah, let's step a little bit closer to your movies, and you once compared your films with baseball in an interview you gave. What has film to do with baseball, and especially with the curveball?
Oh.
Why do you like to play with genres and with the audience?
Right. I'd forgotten this quote. What did I say?
You compared your films and your strategies of, I would say, creating tensions between different interpretations that are invested in your films to the curveball in the baseball, and I just wanted.
This goes back to this. This is a very personal. I feel like I'm in therapy here as opposed.
Yeah, I'm from Vienna.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, this is a personal thing. I have always. I belong to a family of filmmakers. My grandfather is a filmmaker. My father was a cinematographer. My mother worked in film for a long time. My uncles, everybody is either a photographer or a filmmaker. And as a result, I've always been labeled as one of that clan, right? It's like this group of filmmakers, and he's the latest one of them. So the result is that you're kind of limited in people's imagination. People's imaginations about my work can become very limited when they know who I am, right? I'm talking about Iran. And so as a result, I've always tried. My big dream has always been if I only could make film under a pseudonym, if I could escape my own identity and just make the film and never show my face, never come to a screening, and just send out these films into the world and see what happens, and not be responsible. Not have my identity as this particular person have anything to do with that process. This can happen with literature. People can write novels under a pseudonym. It's extremely difficult with cinema because the artist's presence is a very crucial part of the whole machinery that creates cinema. So I've always tried. Not being able to work under a pseudonym, I've always tried to kind of surprise my audience by presenting something completely new and unexpected to them every time. So that's the curveball. Right? It's like shooting something at you and surprising you You come into the theater, people who followed my work, they come into the theater expecting a certain set of things. And hopefully every time they'll be confronted with something completely new. So identity is the thing that I'm trying to escape from.
Yeah.
Both myself and the meaning or then the genre of my films. And so he can tell you about the problem that I'm having right now, because the most radical gesture I made in this regard took place just a few months ago when I decided to make a totally commercial romantic comedy in Iran, something that's unheard of. Right? Romantic comedies involve sex jokes and things like this, and I just decided to. I made a film that shocked everybody. Because it was such a commercial, it was superficial, it was ridiculous, it was full of bad jokes. It was, people in their underwear being caught in funny situations. And
you should show it. Yeah,
you would just kick me out of the festival if you ever saw it. And it was a scandal because, and it remains a scandal because now all the clerics in the country are making speeches against the film and they're trying to ban it. And meanwhile, it became the third highest grossing film in the history of Iranian cinema. Right? Now that's a curveball. Right. So that's my point.
You have a certain interest in B-movies. Huh?
Yeah, I love B-movies. I love watching B-movies. I love, that's the thing. I can't work under a pseudonym, but I can, without a pseudonym, make films that people just can't recognize as my own films. It's a weird way of working under a pseudonym, right? Making pseudo films. Right.
There are a lot of tags and labels circling around. Haghigi the surrealist, Haghigi the postmodernist. Let me pinpoint it and just take it and throw it back, Right. Where does your sense for the surreal come from?
LSD.
From Bolaño or LSD? Yes, or both.
Yeah. When I was growing up, I was 9.5 years old when the Iranian Revolution took place. So it was my puberty plus complete chaos in the streets. At the same time, I was almost at the same time introduced to, psychedelic 60s music by my uncle at the time. And in order to explain to me what all this stuff about, the white rabbit and things like this meant, he had to talk about, psychedelic drugs and things like that. At the same time, again, I was introduced to... I read a book about Dadaism and surrealism, and I became completely fascinated by that. So, and again, I repeat, the revolution was taking place, and there were streets sort of burning up, people being murdered in the streets, and it was just completely chaotic. Mm. And I think it was so what's happening inside a 9-year-old's mind was being reflected everywhere in the streets at the same time. All this weirdness that a pubescent boy is experiencing, it was now the reality around him. And this sort of got connected with my introduction to surrealist works. I very distinctly recall watching Buñuel's early films at the same time, and I was totally fascinated by what I was watching. So I sort of fell in love. It's a very deep love. It's not just I enjoy surrealism. I really identify with it in a very specific way. And so if you want to pinpoint me in some way, that's a really good way. Yeah. Then I grew up a little more, and around the time I was 16 or 17, started experimenting with psychedelic drugs myself, and that really I realized, okay, this is good.
My style.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you told me during a talk we had, and I think you didn't mention it yesterday in the evening, that, for example, the Dragon Arrives was also a little bit inspired by Roberto Bolaño's Wild Detectives.
Savage Detectives, yeah.
Savage Detectives, thank you.
Yeah. Specifically Bolaño, I had this idea, like this is all I said last night. I had the story of the film, but I couldn't understand the form that it had to take on in order to be told in an interesting way. It really was just a Z monster movie, which was unsatisfying to me. And I was looking for a way to find out how to tell the story that would be more exciting for me and interesting. And then I just happened to read The Savage Detectives, which is... The way the book is structured is, for the first 150 pages, you have this straight narrative of, these two poets who get involved with a prostitute in Mexico, and they have to, they help the prostitute escape from her pimp, and there's this violent kind of escape narrative, and then there's a rupture. That section of the book ends, and for the next 500 pages of the novel, so these two poets have disappeared along with the prostitute and the prostitute's friend. These four guys are gone, and something like 150 independent narratives from 150 different people kind of describe to you these meetings that they had over the course of the next 25 years with these people. And it's like a jigsaw puzzle that's all messed up. Yeah, it doesn't have a form. So you have 150 monologues about what these people saw when they saw these people. And then that ends, and then we go back to the story and we learn what happened to these four guys. So the idea that a group of people has gone missing, and another group of people are looking for them, and they're telling these stories about what happened. I realized, okay, this is it. I can make a film about my characters, but not just about them. It's a story of me looking for them. Mm-hmm. It's not a very complicated thing, but it took a long time for me to discover it.
And you have those also in Bolaño's novel. You have those layerings. Layered time levels of investigations.
Yeah. Yeah, usually in Bolaño you have epistemological layers. So who knows what happens? First of all, the characters know what happened to them, and then there are these witnesses who witnessed what happened to the characters. And then there's the narrator of the story who has met the witnesses and has a relationship to the witnesses. So there's layers and layers of knowledge of different qualities, which is what I try to emulate in A Dragon Arrives, and it really helped me. I mean, it was really exciting to do that.
And we already started to talk about it after Modest Reception, and maybe we can continue a little bit with this issue, subject matter. You like to hide things in boxes. We've also seen it yesterday. You like to use envelopes where suddenly wrestling photos appear in the end of the film. Sports again, wrestling, football, but just in parentheses. This one. And there's one moment I love. You will see tomorrow in Canaan. There is an elevator with a technical failure, I think, and he always stops at the wrong floor, and the door opens and it's flat under construction. And we can talk about a lot of moments about hidden things, reappearing things like the donkey. Right. The mule at the end of Modest Reception, he disappears and he reappears. Can you elaborate a little bit on those structures?
Yeah. Well, structuring a plot requires repetition. right? So the most interesting thing about making a screenplay is how you get these elements and you go back to these elements over the course of the film. These are like the pegs that put a tent in the ground. Like you're constructing a tent. Those of you who do, I don't do camping, but people who do camping know what I'm talking about. So you need to have these pegs in the ground so that you can have the tent. And these pegs are the elements that repeat themselves in the course of the story. And each time they come back, they kind of remind you of the last time that you saw them, and they remind you of what happened during the course of this distance in time. Hitchcock is a really great example of using this kind of thing. So,
like to create suspense, huh? Also,
it does. I mean, it naturally creates suspense when you have an element that changes its meaning every time you see it. So, for example, in Modest Reception, a very good example of this is the piece of cloth that is wrapped around the mule's leg.
Okay.
So, what is that? At first, it's a gift from this guy to this woman.
Yeah,
and he's saying, look, you will look so much more beautiful if you put this on your head.
Yes, Lonesdale on the...
Right. So initially, it's an object that is kind of a tool of seduction, for example. Then it becomes the same object changes its meaning, and it becomes a tool for basically lying to the person who owns the mule. So she pulls out the same piece of cloth and says, "Look, I'll wrap this around the broken leg of this mule, and it'll be fine." As if it has some kind of a magical quality or something. So it becomes a tool for lying to somebody about it. And then it goes on, and at the end of the film, we see that piece of cloth again, and now it's like a symbol of... It sort of makes you remember the entire film, right? It's an object that is repeated so that you remember what it was before and before that. And
it creates a memoryscape, huh?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just like, for example, in Strangers on a Train, you have that lighter that keeps coming back as the object that it makes you kind of realize, oh my God, this is what happened in the course of the story. And by the time the object is thrown into the duct in the street, it's like it has so much meaning attached. It's no longer just a lighter anymore. It's this heavy symbol of everything that the film was about.
Yeah. So you know Claude Chabrol's The Butcher?
I haven't seen that film, no, yeah.
That's a great moment.
But Chabrol himself is such a Hitchcock lover. It's a Hitchcock trick, basically.
First of all, hello. And I want to know that, is that a suspense trick like a prop? Or maybe I have the feeling that it's just for making ambiguity in the movie, because as a prop, for instance, like Strangers in the Train, all the time it has a dramatic in the sense of story. It has a dramatic function to give us more information, to open up the structure and the story. But in your movies, usually it's still vague, even more vague at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
For instance, when I watch these elements, little by little, I am more confused,
Exactly. Yeah. This in Hitchcock, you have these objects that kind of make more and more sense as they are repeated in the film. With me, I mean, why are we talking like in these terms? Like with Hitchcock and then with me. But what I'm trying to say is, for me, it's like dreams that are repeated, right? So you have, I don't know if you have this problem, but when you have repetitive dreams, when a dream begins and you think of yourself as you're sleeping, oh my God, here it comes again. It's that dream. Each time it becomes more terrifying and kind of suspenseful in that sense. It doesn't, because it doesn't open itself up to you any more than it did last time. It's still this ambiguous and weird sense that you don't know why I'm here again and what's going on, why this is happening, what does it mean? So no, it doesn't increase the dramatic effect because I'm not making a suspenseful film. It's not a detective story. Yeah. But what the repetition of these elements mean is that it makes you feel more like it thickens the dreamscape, right? It makes it more like a dream every time. And that the effect of that is that it becomes more and more ambiguous. But ambiguity is the main tool I have. Yeah. Right? As I was explaining during the course of this whole session, the idea is to make you expect something, and I throw something at you that makes you realize, no, it's more complicated than I thought. It's more ambiguous than I thought.
So what about audience? Because all the time you say that, okay, when I am writing script, I am making it, I don't care about audience in the sense of that, okay, can they understand my movie or the plot or anything, But on the other hand, you are a filmmaker, you are working with a medium that you distribute it, you sell it to audience, And I am a little bit thinking about that. Okay, when Mr. Haghigi is writing the script, he don't care about anything, even maybe about self-conscious, just writing, or no, you care about conveying a specific plot or thought, everything.
See, meaning,
even a dream.
Meaning and understanding are not concerns of mine most of the time.
Yeah.
So the idea is not that. Okay, if I was going to make a speech to you, I would ask you to come, and I'm
not like that.
Yeah, come in. I'm going to make some kind of I'm going to say something to you, and you're going to learn something from what I've said. If it had that structure, then of course meaning and my meaning and your understanding would become extremely important things.
So it's just two colors for you, yes? Quite ambiguity, vague movie, and quite open and some sort of clear movie or something.
No. It's a poetic space.
Range.
It's a poetic space. It's a space in which you're supposed to feel things regarding objects that are presented to you. So, of course, in order to be able to follow through the 2 hours or so, 1.5 hours of film that is being presented to you, you need to have some kind of a structure, and you need to have a certain network of meanings for the audience to be able to follow what's going on, right? So it doesn't look like this crazy ambiguity altogether. So there's a plot, and you want to know what happens next. But really, that's just a tool for me to keep you interested in the film while I'm presenting you with these objects that are going to become more and more dreamlike and ambiguous as it goes along, so that you enjoy the indecisions and the confusions and the ambiguities that are surrounding you. So yeah, I mean, it's not like I'm trying to say something for you to understand the meaning of, and then not letting you understand.
Is there any spectrum in between saying some slogan and saying nothing, for you?
Yeah, that is poetry. That's exactly what I'm saying. Okay. The space in between is a poetic state in which you are following a plot, but you're not understanding every single detail regarding it.
And a little bit regarding to previous question, do you have any specific method to, not specific like a formula, a specific method to mixing your sources as Malakut, Badajan, blah, 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 with your original ideas, or just all of them are accidentally picked up and put in your dream or in your ideas?
Well, in the case of A Dragon Arrives, which is an exceptional film in that it's referring to all kinds of cultural products that were made during a specific time, the organizing principle was the time frame. So we're talking about the years between 1963 and 1969, something like this. And so we're talking about cultural products that were made in that time frame that had this quality of that in some ways related to what the affective qualities of my films were going to be. So surrealistic stories, plays, and films that were made during that period that kind of are in the same category as the film itself. Yeah. That's the main thing.
Okay, I continue. Thank you. Yes, when we talk about poetry, you want to make a break?
No.
When we talk about poetry, we of course have to continue to talk about structure, and also confusion has to be structured. If it's and also of course a dream logic, because we are not dreaming, we are watching your movies, and there's only one thing I want to add. Your discussion you had right now, maybe one only. You talked about props. One can only talk about MacGuffins, because you mentioned Hitchcock and he liked to use MacGuffins. I think everybody knows about MacGuffins, but just to tell you, MacGuffins, it's a class, it's a master class. So I have to become a little bit didactic. MacGuffin is a kind of desired object, an object that motivates the action, but has not really a sense in the narration. And I think at one side you use classical MacGuffins, but you also use some escalations or ambiguities that are not at all classical anymore. And there is an interesting image you gave us right now, the image of the tent. Building up a tent, and it was therefore also especially interesting for me because I've been in Tehran, as I told you, and I could experience a workshop that Ashka Farhadi gave at the Fajr Festival. It was quite crowded because everybody wanted to know the Ashka Farhadi formula. you will know that those situations. And he gave a completely different image. He told the students, you have to take a rope. When you want to tell a good story, you have to take a rope and nail the beginning.
And the end.
And the ending.
That's
and
right.
I think that's quite a difference. And let me, just two phrases and then you can say whatever you want. I think there's one parallel, but it's the only parallel that you both like to restrain some informations, to leave out some informations. But Farhadi, he has a classical analytical drama style, and you learn a lot about the past.
Right.
And a lot comes together at the end. And I think your conception of storytelling is completely different.
Well, it depends on which films you're talking about. I mean, Asghar and I have written two films together, Canon and Fireworks Wednesday, both of which you'll be able to see one today and one tomorrow.
Yeah.
This thing that he talks about is actually from Brendel, the pianist, when he was talking about Schubert sonatas. Actually, I read an interview with him in the New Yorker magazine with Brendel, and that's when we were together working on Canon. In fact, when I read that piece, and I was telling him, look, he says exactly the same thing that we're doing. Brendel was talking about a Schubert sonata as a piece of rope that you hang clothes on. And so for it not to sag and come down to the ground, you have to really pin it at the beginning and the end. And so you have to play the sonata as one thing from beginning to end, and you have to sort of throw these little movements as if they're pieces of clothing on the clothesline.
Interesting.
So that's where that comes from, just so that you know. And we both feel the same. This is one of the main points of agreement between he and I, is that you have to have like I said, these points that kind of really drive in the meaning of your film. These are beats, they're plot points, basically. You have to have your plot points. It's a Sid Field kind of straightforward thing. It's an Aristotle thing, This, and these 4 events have to take place. And you have to know where they are. They have to happen in the right order. They have to happen with a certain distance. They have to be structured properly. And once you have that, and once you know them, then you can just do whatever you want between, and you can just do all kinds of crazy things in between. So when people talk about me as some kind of a surrealist postmodernist or something like that, it's fine. I'm not saying it's not true. But they ignore the fact that I also write my scripts very strictly based on a 3-part structure. It's like I have Act 1, I have Act 2, I have Act 3. I have my plot points. I'm a very classical scriptwriter in that sense. But then I throw in all this weird stuff into that. And I think the reason why people relate to my films, I mean, just like you said, confusion needs to be structured in order to become an aesthetic object. The reason why my films become aesthetic objects, if they do, is because of the 3-act structure that I have in place.
Yeah.
Now, he does that in a lot more kind of, like you say, in a more classical way. And he has this kind of backward reference all the time, so that something happens and then it makes you realize what the meaning of what happened previously actually was. He really likes to do this kind of looping movement in his scripts, where each event explains what happened previously.
And you like to construct, I would say, a mystic ground. Derrida would say.
Yeah, I like Derrida. I mean, yeah, he's a great man, and he has informed a lot of the things that I do. But I'm a little more playful, I think, than Farhadi is. I mean, I think everybody's a little more playful than Farhadi is, because he doesn't have much of a sense of humor, I would say, in his films. But he's a very funny guy himself, but a sense of humor is not something you find in his films.
Of course, I have a lot of questions, but one crucial basic question: do you want to make a break now? Do you prefer to continue?
I think we should not take a break and just continue until 12 and end it.
Okay,
what do you
that's
think?
a good suggestion.
No?
So then I suggest, that you continue, that we really open up for some more questions now, and we can also, blow up details and everything.
Sure.
Huh?
You said that you picked those sources based on a time frame to that time of history of Iran. So it means you have a specific idea about what you are going to make, yeah? But on the other hand, you hide it from audience, okay? We accept that. It's your style. It's your way of filmmaking. But for me, it's a little bit unclear that when you are using this method to make your movies, do you think that maybe, just maybe, audience get different codes of your codes? Is that important for you or not? You said that it's not important for me, the answers or the thoughts of receptions by audiences. Yes, but as a filmmaker, do you ever think of that? Okay, let's make a movie like Canaan, like I think, in my opinion, like Men at Work, like Modest Reception, make clear opinion about things, but in a vague way. I think there is a misunderstanding between you and audiences. I think you like that audience get your point of view, but even you don't confess that, because it's a little bit...
it's like this. You go into a psychoanalyst's office, and you know that the thing where they put a
Welcome.
like a blot of ink, you know, this thing above, like, and they open it up, it looks like a butterfly, and they say, what do you see in this? And they say, oh, I see my parents sleeping with each other.
Rorschach.
Yeah, exactly.
Because really, all the time you answer like that. It's Rorschach kind of, you know.
Well, that's what it is. I present you with an ambiguous object, and enjoy the fact that you're reading things, and you're seeing things in my film that I never saw, and that's what's beautiful. That's the whole point. The point is to present an object that is open enough, weird enough, and meaningless enough, but at the same time structured enough, so that you can look at it and find something about yourself in it, right? Now, that completely takes control away from me as the kind of the organizing principle of this whole project, right? Which is fine, which is exactly the point. And I'm just presenting you again. I don't want to repeat myself. I present you with an ambiguous object. You tell me what it means. That's what I was saying last night, and that's why Q&As are really A and Qs for me. So I come in and I say, okay, so you've seen this object. Now, what was it? Right? And then people say different things. And that's really exciting for me.
Does it mean everybody with this material can make movies like that?
Of course not, because otherwise they would.
No, maybe just give them your materials and, you know, get the same result.
No, because it has to be beautiful. First of all, it has to be ambiguous, and that is a very difficult thing to do. Because ambiguity doesn't mean meaninglessness. It has to be, like I said, it has to have a structuring principle, but that principle should not be obvious. So we have structure, we have plot, we have character, we have stuff that's happening, people are following through. But at the same time, there's something in the film that you're asking yourself, the audience is asking themselves, what the hell is going on? There's something that they don't understand throughout the film. Yeah. Even though they're following the film and they're following the characters, there's a dreamlike kind of element in the film that's preventing them from feeling like, okay, I understand what's going on. And that is an art that I have and most others don't.
It seems a little...
If you're looking for that, that's what it is.
Really, I am not looking for finding a content, but it sounds a little bit conservative for me. You know,
it sounds like what?
Conservative محافظه‌کاری. You know, because in this way, nobody can see you behind your movie. Yes, it's true. You make something for audience, and you don't want to stick yourself to the movie, and like an audience sit in the salon and watch your movie, and you have a lot of questions like audience, you know. But in the sense of function between director and movie, it's quite conservative for me. In the sense,
I don't have a problem with being conservative. If that's what it is, then that can be it.
No, I don't want to say it's. I
don't claim to be a radical. In fact, I have no interest in being a radical.
No. Not in this mean. When you say that, yes, it is. You can get a lot of different content in the movie. You know, it means yes, it's an open movie. You know, and you can have a lot of different reception by the movie. But on the other hand, by the aesthetic of the movie, I think it's quite conservative. It doesn't let us to think in a different way. Yes, we have a lot of different questions, but all of them are on the surface of the movie.
I think that's inevitable with all films, as a matter of fact. I think that whenever you make a film, whoever makes it, and in fact this is the case with all, I mean, you know, we were talking about Derrida, and this is a very good moment to bring him up. You cannot control the fate of your text, right? The audience, the reader of the text, will look at your text, and all texts are open texts. Now the question is how much the author has tried to control the meaning that the text has. Some people are really adamant about controlling that meaning. They want you to get this specific meaning out of your film, and that's where the whole notion of, for example, this really old-fashioned notion of the social responsibility of the artist, this sort of 1960s left-wing thing. It's like, I'm trying to say this, and I want you to understand it in this particular way, and I'm putting everything in the film to kind of control your thinking movements, so that the film leads you to this specific meaning that I have in mind, which is, fine, and people do that. I certainly don't want to do that. What I want to do is accept the fact that I cannot control the meaning of my film, accept the fact that the film can have different meanings for different people, and use that as a sort of a creative tool. So my responsibility is to make something exciting, right? Emotionally exciting, so that you're confronted by something that is interesting. It has beautiful colors, tension, suspense. You want to know what happens. You see crazy things that you didn't expect to see, and objects are juxtaposed with each other that create. This is the most important thing: create a dreamscape, and create this ambiguous space, and then I stop and I ask you to sort of take that atmosphere and make with it what you will, because inevitably you're going to do that anyway, right? Even with the most socially responsible films, like I don't know what's like Ken Loach. He just won the Palme d'Or. Clearly, he doesn't want you to think of his films as some ambiguous dream space where any meaning can be, derived from it. Obviously, he won't want to do that, which is the reason why I find that kind of filmmaking extremely boring. I mean, it is socially responsible, and it is, radical in the sense that it's not. I mean, he's not conservative in the sense that you're saying, because he's taking responsibility for what he's saying in his film, right? Which is fine, but it bores me incredibly.
Yeah, apparently you don't want to educate
no.
with your films, and you don't want to make propaganda in
right.
in no sense.
No.
It's of course about your relationship to the films of Mani Haghigi. So you are especially now invited to ask more questions.
I remember Roland Barthes, The Death of the Author.
Yes.
I think you put it a bit forward, because you're not just saying the people should do what they, if you are as an author, if you get out a text, the people do, but you want to bring it a bit more forward, because you say you make the text especially ambiguous, so that people have more space to fill it. Is that?
Yeah, that's precisely what I'm saying. I think that in order for you to have your imagination triggered, you can't just do that with anything, right? I need to create a machine, and I need to create a space that will trigger your imagination, right? So that you start thinking about these different kinds of meanings that the text might have, and the play in your mind, the play between your mind and your imagination and the weird things I'm showing you on the screen, will sort of generate all these kinds of different meanings that the text might have. It's obvious to me, and this is something that there's no argument about. It is obvious to me that the meaning of any piece of art resides in the mind of the audience and not on the screen. That's, to me, it's clear, right? And once you accept that, and once you realize that you have no access to the audience's mind because it's them and you don't know them, and different parts of the world will have different kind of ideas about this, then it becomes a sort of a radical decision. You just have to let go of the idea of, I'm the one who creates and controls the meaning of the film, and let it go. So, for example, Men at Work was the perfect example of this. Did you see Men at Work? Different that film did extremely well in terms of festival presence. So it was shown at over 100 film festivals around the world, all continents, everywhere. And most of the time I was traveling with that film. And so I've done a lot of Q&As for Men at Work. And in each screening, at the end of each screening, people had a completely different idea of what the film meant. This was during the Iraq War, the first Iraq War. And so, like I said during the Q&A here, we took it to Michael Moore's film festival in Traverse City, Michigan, and everybody there, all these left-wing radicals there, were totally convinced. And there was no question of any other interpretation. Everybody was sure this was a film about the Iraq War, that the Rock was Saddam Hussein, and these four guys trying to overthrow the Rock were the European Union and like George Bush. And when I thought, okay, well, that's not what I thought when I was making the film. But that's okay. See, that's the whole point. Is that's okay. It's really enjoyable for me that you're thinking it this way. Deborah Young, who used to write, the famous film critic who used to write for, I think at the time was Hollywood Reporter or Variety, wrote a very positive review of the film, and she was sure, it was obvious to her, that this was a film about the patriarchy, that this rock was this huge phallic symbol. It was manhood up there. It was this big penis up there on the mountains, and these four guys were trying to fight it and trying to regain it for themselves because they had been emasculated and they've become blah blah. Inside Iran, everybody thought, again, the state censorship board, everybody thought, and the reason why it was banned was because everybody thought that this was the Islamic Republic of Iran, and these were the people who were trying to overthrow it, right? So I can't walk around the world following my film and saying, no, that's not what I meant. In fact, what I meant was, blah, blah. I find that, it's very joyful for me, and it's very interesting for me to see all these different reactions to my film. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't have my own personal interpretation of what was going on. I was making a film about people being confronted by a mysterious object, which is something that happens every day in life anyway. So, you wake up, you look at yourself in the mirror and you ask yourself, holy shit, I'm still alive. Why is that? And how is it that I'm around? And is it possible that I can remember who I am? And everyday mysteries that we're used to because life has become banal, but it is interesting. So that's what I was doing myself. But I had no intention of making a film that said that, right? I just sort of used that as this object around which all kinds of meanings would gather. And the pinnacle of that, I think the end point of that is that Dragon Arrives, where people just, everything in it is designed to have multiple meanings. And it may become confusing and frustrating on one level, but I think at the same time it can be really kind of exciting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think that because you're Iranian, people try to find more explanation if the same film were made, which is not possible, by another filmmaker from France, or wouldn't be so complicated the reception?
I have no idea. That's something that it's interesting to think about it. Because Iran is such an isolated place politically and socially, and has been for so many years, it does have this, exotic aura. Ooh, like Iranian, it must be very interesting. Which does help in some ways, in different ways. But that's sort of not a serious way of dealing with the film, right? I don't know. David Lynch is not Iranian, and people have the same reaction to his films. And And Jodorowsky is not Iranian. People have this.
Lynch, he also likes boxes.
Yeah,
blue boxes.
Look, Lynch is God. Okay, David Lynch is like up there as the
Cassavetes is God.
Cassavetes, Lynch, and Lars von Trier are gods, and the rest of us are just little humans running around trying to do our best. And that's the only rule that we have. Everything else is you can decide whatever else you want, but these three guys, you have to respect them.
I think you want to say it.
And do you feel any difference between making, thinking, and confusing? I am not talking about speaking in a clear way and content and convey specific idea. Just speaking to Roland Barthes, making thinking by getting some data and making confusion in the same.
Right. Yeah, of course I do. You don't want to confuse people, right? That's not. I mean, confusing people is really simple. What you do is you sort of say something and then you say the opposite and then you say a third thing that's unrelated to that opposition, and then people become very confused, right?
With this reception.
No. But, yeah, I mean, what the people in the film do to people is not even that, because even in Modest Reception, there's that's a really good example, Modest Reception, because in Modest Reception, what we did was we used logic to show how confusing logic can be, right? There's a dichotomy between logic and customs, logic and social beliefs, because social beliefs and customs are not logical. They're just, rules that people have to make life easier. So, for example, it's a social custom to bury the dead, right? It's a social custom. People believe in it. People do it. People don't question it. But then there's some purely logical person shows up and says, let's talk about why you're burying the dead. Right? Mm-hmm. Let's really talk about that. Is it really important to do that? I think there are more important things to do now. And so it disrupts the social kind of game by becoming coldly logical, right? And then the audience has to decide whether, to take sides, because the great thing about the really difficult thing about writing Modest Reception for us was that every argument that these people made would have to be perfectly logical. And I think it is a perfectly logical argument to say, don't bury your dead baby because I'm giving you, $10 million if you don't. And with that $10 million, you can feed the rest of your kids and run away from this hell. So all you have to do is not bury her. So there's some kind of a tension, emotional tension involved, but it's pretty logical that you should accept that argument, right? Now, why wouldn't you? Because you're religious, because social customs prevent you from doing it. And so that tension becomes exciting. It's confusing for the protagonist in the film because he has to make a decision between social customs and logic. But that confusion isn't chaos. It's a confusion that has structure. You have to decide between two things.
But I think when it comes to social customs, I have the impression that you especially like to create tensions between also social classes. In Modest Reception,
look, my job is to
confront different social classes.
I think that my job. Look, I come from a country where social customs are really important things, right? Like people are really supposed to follow certain unquestioned customs, right? Which is oppressive kind of an atmosphere. So my job is to say, look, you think it's virtuous to behave in this way. You think it's virtuous to have to accept these social customs and stuff. Now here I am saying no. Let's think of it in a different way. And so it creates tension. It creates a lot of
Rupture.
It becomes it's emotionally sort of difficult for people to accept this, and not just within Iran. Like I said, after we screened Modest Reception at the Berlinale, after the first screening, this old German woman came up to me in Potsdamer Platz with her umbrella and started hitting me on the head. And she said, "You are a very bad man. You have done this film." And she wasn't just confusing me with the character I was playing in the film. She was actually confronting me as the filmmaker and saying, "You have disrupted something about my thinking regarding, social customs or something." I wasn't sure what she was saying because I was being attacked, so I didn't have time to think properly. But it does have that reaction.
If you have energy,
I'm fine.
for 5 to 10 more minutes.
Yes, of course.
Then I'd like to come to an aspect about your films, in your films, that is quite underexposed so far, and therefore I'd like to expose it. And that's I would say, sonic texture of your movies, which I definitely like very much. The sound editing, the soundscapes, the sound design. Apparently you pay a lot of interest and invest a lot of work with your cooperators in music, in sound design, soundscape, etc. I could give you a lot of examples. I have the impression, for example, you like to show reactions to some sound events from which you don't see the source. You like to begin your films with sound and show the image afterwards, or start with the image afterwards. Can you elaborate a little bit on the importance of sound design and music? And of course, we can begin with Dragon Arrives, the depiction, the use of different voices, voice-overs, which reminded me of some Scorsese movies, I have to say. But
yeah, the great thing about sound and sound design is that, I mean, we've said this, and now it's kind of funny to say it now all of a sudden, but it can create ambiguity more than images can. So when you're watching an image, you can disrupt the meaning of that image if you accompany it with a sound that doesn't make any sense for it to be heard at that moment, right? So, for example, the opening of Canon is like this. You'll watch Canon later on today if you come to see it. The opening of Canon, you have an extreme close-up of the woman, the main protagonist, and there's this mechanical sound that's going on. And we hold on to her shot for a long time.
Yeah, we don't know what
the sound is, and it's like after a certain point, you begin to wonder what the hell is going on, and so the film begins with a question, right? What's going on? Immediately, you're thrown into this state of not knowing. What is and Canon, compared to all the rest of my films, is the one that has no ambiguity, mostly. I mean, it's the least ambiguous film that I've made.
You have a MacGuffin, the knife.
Yeah.
We'll see it. Yeah.
The other thing about sound is that it exists outside the frame. So with an image, you can only show something, and it's really hard to reference what's outside the frame with an image. But usually when you add the element of sound, you can create the world that is outside the frame and give it some really specific identity, right? This is what Kiarostami does extremely well. So with Kiarostami's films, you usually have somebody in a car driving around, and all you see is just the person in the car. But with the soundscape that he creates, you realize that it's such a huge world that he's moving in, and you hear all these different voices and all these people he encounters before you even see them. So there's that. But music is a different thing, because music is really, if I want to confess to something here, basically I come up with the music first.
Nine Inch Nails?
Yeah, I'm listening to Nine Inch Nails and I'm thinking, I want to make a film like this. I want to make a film that sounds like Nine Inch Nails, right? And that's how it begins. It's like it creates the mood. Moods are very important. Mm-hmm. So you ask yourself, what kind of a mood do I want this film to have? And you find a piece of music that corresponds to that particular mood, and then you know what to do. You know how to write it. With Modest Reception, oddly enough, it was the Schubert Quintet. So I listened to the Schubert Quintet, you won't believe how many times per day. I just had it on rotation, mm-hmm. and the first movement over and over again all day long. And after about 2 months, I said, okay, now I know what the mood of the film is, and I wrote it. And so it's written in that register. It's as if it gives you the key signature for the film.
What kind of music did you listen to right now in Basel the last days in your hotel room?
Yeah, that the problem I'm having with my next film is that I haven't yet found the music for it. So that's the reason why I have to keep rewriting it until I know what's going on.
Are there any other questions? Some, not final questions, but
yeah, I would say final
questions to open up the to open up the ending of our discussion of our masterclass. There's only one aspect I want to mention for the ending of our talk, and that's your play with letters at the beginning of the films, which I like very much. You liked to layer different letters and different colors, and it has become like a signature.
Yeah, this is what happened. I was always interested in the title sequence of the film. I've always enjoyed, the title sequences of films, and I've always tried to make interesting title sequences for my films. And then it occurred to me, with Modest Reception, that's what happened. It occurred to me that films don't really need title sequences because everybody knows what the film is called. Everybody knows the actors who are in the film already when they come to see the film. And all the information regarding who the cameraman and the sound engineer are all available, and you don't need to know that right now, right? You can
maybe not the music or not every piece.
Yeah, and in Hollywood now, it's just they don't even have the title sequence at the beginning of the film anymore anyway. So it occurred to me that we have this tradition of a title sequence which is unnecessary. So what else can we do with it, right? So what I do now, in a Dragon, you don't speak Farsi, but in A Dragon Arrives, you have a title sequence that doesn't say anything, right? It's just letters that are kind of flashing, but it never comes to any stasis. You never know what it says. It kind of feels like it says A Dragon Arrives because those are close-up shots of these letters, but it doesn't actually ever say A Dragon Arrives as this one frame. And so really a title sequence now for me is this opportunity to set the mood for the film, which is usually a mood of confusion, right? or chaos, right? So you tell the story for about 5 minutes and then you have this explosion of music and shit on the screen, right?
It reminded me of Tetsuo. Do you know this Japanese film by Shinya Tsukamoto?
Right, but I don't remember what the
very hard techno music with flashy title sequences.
Yeah, in A Dragon Arrives, it was just a way of disrupting. Because the story was going to be disrupted. You had this story, and then suddenly we had to switch to something completely different. Like we had to move out of the island and start telling the story of me, the filmmaker, who's going to... So we needed something like an axe to come in and just chop the film up, and that was a perfect opportunity to just do that. Same thing with Canon. Same thing with Modest Reception. Something had to come in and just show the audience that this was going to be a little more difficult than they expected. So we had the letters. Some of the letters were written backward and upside down and things like this, so that it was practically impossible to read the name of the crew. But you could tell that there was something going. Like you were trying to decipher it, but you couldn't because there wasn't enough time. Unlike all of this in Canon, we have this very slow, very beautiful, title sequence at the very beginning of the film, so that people understand. Okay, look, this is a film that's going to tell you everything. We're not going to play with your head. We'll tell a straight story for you this time. It's like that.
Speaking of modest reception, again, I have a question and support it with an example. Do you feel any strong relationship between location and your script? For instance, in Modest Reception, I have the feeling that we can watch it in a theater, in a play, just with several changing decoration. I couldn't find out any specific connection between location as a road movie and script, especially.
Yeah, in Modest Reception, we went out of our way to exclude the setting as a dramatic element. So the only thing we wanted you to the dynamic between the characters was complicated and difficult to follow, and so it was very important for me to kind of focus on exactly what was going on in terms of, because it was a logical syllogism, like it was like something logical had to be kind of demonstrated as if it was some kind of a mathematical formula or something, and the audience needed to concentrate on exactly how this was taking place. And so even though we were in this very beautiful landscape, we couldn't afford to show it as much as we wanted to, because then it would take the focus away from the actors. But what we wanted was definitely an image of a very harsh landscape. So the fact that it was very cold, that it had sort of weaving roads and you could get lost in them, this had to be established because that was the kind of general mood. But that was all we needed. Interesting question, because then with the same cinematographer, we went and did A Dragon Arrives, where it was, on the contrary, extremely important to show the scenery as much as we could and really make use of how weird this place was, because the location was actually adding something to the level of the emotional intensity of what the characters were experiencing. So it had to look like a dream. It had to look like it was not. It had to look like planet Mars or something like that. We spent a long time scouting the locations for A Dragon Arrives, because it had to be, it was important that it looked like a dream. The setting for the locations for A Modest Reception also did, in fact, look like a big dream, but we had to avoid them. We had to sort of not show them, because I think that would have just confused the audience more than it was necessary.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions, I think?
Really? More questions?
Let's have some lunch. Thank you very much, Mani Haghigi.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.